On a chilly morning in 2002, nestled in the picturesque outskirts of a small town, the air buzzed with anticipation. It was the wedding day of Eliza Bennett and Jacob Thorne, a couple who seemed destined to spend eternity together. Their story had all the hallmarks of a romance novel. Childhood sweethearts who had grown up side by side, their bond blossoming over the years into a love that everyone envied. The ceremony was to be held at an old country estate, its sprawling gardens and grand hall providing the perfect backdrop for their union. Guests arrived in droves, the atmosphere alive with laughter and excitement. The bride's family was bustling with last-minute arrangements, and the groom's party was relaxed, sipping champagne in the groom's suite. Eliza, radiant in her flowing ivory gown, stood in the bridal suite with her maid of honor, Lila. Lila wasn't just her maid of honor, but her closest confidant, a woman Eliza had known since they were toddlers. Their friendship was unshakable, a bond fortified over decades of shared secrets, childhood mischief, and unconditional support. Lila fussed over Eliza, fixing her veil and joking to ease her nerves. Despite the smiles, something lingered in the air, an unspoken tension that Eliza couldn't quite place. But with so many people moving in and out of the room, laughter and chatter filling the space, she brushed it off as wedding day jitters. Jacob, meanwhile, was tucked away in the groom's suite with his best man, Liam. They exchanged quips about married life, and Jacob seemed calm, almost too calm. Liam noted his composed demeanor, but chalked it up to confidence in his decision. After all, Jacob had always been steady, the kind of man who approached life with quiet assurance. Still, there was something off in his eyes, a fleeting flicker of unease that Liam noticed but chose not to address. As the ceremony time approached, Eliza's excitement mounted. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, taking in her reflection, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. It was then that her younger cousin Emily burst into the room, her face flushed and her eyes wide. She hesitated at the door, clutching a small bouquet. "Eliza," she stammered, "I think you need to see something." Eliza frowned, puzzled. "What is it, Em? Can't it wait until after the ceremony?" Emily bit her lip, her gaze darting nervously to Lila. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It can't wait." The urgency in Emily's voice sent a chill down Eliza's spine. She exchanged a glance with Lila, who shrugged, and followed Emily out of the room. They weaved through the bustling corridors until they reached an alcove just outside the groom's suite. Emily gestured toward the slightly ajar door, her face pale. Eliza stepped closer, her heart pounding as she heard muffled voices from within. Inside the room, Jacob stood with his back to the door, his voice low and urgent. Opposite him was a woman whose laughter Eliza would have recognized anywhere. Lila, her best friend, her maid of honor. The two of them were locked in a heated, intimate conversation, their bodies close enough to suggest a familiarity that went far beyond friendship. Eliza froze, her breath hitching as she strained to hear their words. "I told you," Jacob said, his tone exasperated. "This was never supposed to happen. It was a mistake." Lila's voice was softer, almost pleading. "A mistake? Is that all it was to you? Jacob, you promised me." "Stop!" he interrupted, his voice sharp. "This is Eliza's day. We can't do this now." Eliza's mind reeled, her chest felt tight, and a wave of nausea threatened to overcome her. She pushed the door open without thinking, her voice trembling as she spoke. "What the hell is going on here?" Both Jacob and Lila whipped around, their faces draining of color. The shock in their eyes confirmed what Eliza already knew. There was no misunderstanding, no room for doubt. The betrayal was as clear as day. Lila opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jacob took a step toward Eliza, his hands raised as if to placate her. "Eliza," he began, his voice laden with guilt. "I can explain." Explain?" she spat, her voice rising. "You're standing here on our wedding day with my best friend, and you think there's something to explain?" The commotion drew the attention of nearby guests, who began to gather in the hallway, their murmurs filling the air. Eliza felt the weight of their stares but didn't care. Her world had just crumbled, and nothing else mattered. Lila finally found her voice, though it was barely audible. "Eliza, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Eliza snapped, her eyes blazing with fury. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long? Both of you!" She turned her gaze to Jacob, her eyes dripping with venom. "And you? How dare you? Did you think I wouldn't find out, or were you planning to marry me and keep her on the side?" Jacob's face twisted with regret, but before he could respond, Eliza stormed out of the room, shoving past the growing crowd of onlookers. She didn't stop until she reached the gardens, where she collapsed onto a bench, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The betrayal cut deep, the pain searing and relentless. Minutes passed, or maybe hours? Eliza couldn't tell. She was lost in a haze of anger and heartbreak when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Liam, Jakob's best man, standing over her with an expression of concern. "Eliza," he said gently, "I don't know what to say. I had no idea." "Didn't you?" she interrupted, her voice bitter. "You're his best friend. You're supposed to know everything about him." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I swear, if I'd known, I would have told you. You didn't deserve this." His words brought little comfort, but his presence was grounding. Eliza wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. "I can't go back in there," she said, her voice resolute. "I can't face them." "You don't have to," Liam replied, "but you do need to decide what comes next." What came next was something no one could have anticipated. As the hours passed, the wedding was called off, and the guests were sent home. Eliza retreated to her family's estate, where she shut herself away, refusing to see or speak to anyone. Days turned into weeks, and the scandal became the talk of the town. But Eliza wasn't just nursing a broken heart. She was plotting. Her mind raced with thoughts of vengeance, each more vivid than the last. The betrayal had ignited a darkness within her, one that refused to be extinguished. She began to devise a plan, one that would ensure neither Jacob nor Lila would ever forget the consequences of their actions. The fateful night came on a stormy evening, the skies mirroring the turmoil in Eliza's heart. She invited Jacob and Lila to meet her at the estate, under the pretense of closure. Both arrived hesitant but hopeful, believing that perhaps Eliza was ready to forgive. But forgiveness was never part of her plan. As they entered the dimly lit parlor, Eliza locked the door behind them, her eyes cold and calculating. What unfolded next would leave the small town reeling for years to come, a tale of love, betrayal, and a revenge so chilling it would be whispered about for generations. Jacob and Lila stood in the center of the grand parlor, its once inviting warmth replaced by an oppressive chill. The storm outside howled, its fury echoing the tempest within Eliza's heart. She stood by the fireplace, her pale face illuminated by the flickering flames, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked eerily composed, her gaze fixed on the two people who had shattered her world. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the chaos simmering beneath the surface. "I thought it was important for us to talk." Jacob shifted uneasily, his hands buried in his pockets. "Eliza, I'm glad you reached out. I know I've hurt you, but don't," she cut him off, her tone sharp enough to make him flinch. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend this is just about hurt feelings. You destroyed everything. You both did." Leela stepped forward, her expression contrite. "Eliza, please. I know what we did was unforgivable, but I swear it wasn't meant to hurt you. It just happened." "It just happened?" Eliza repeated, her voice rising. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You stole my fiancé. You lied to my face every single day, and you want me to believe it just happened?" The tension in the room was suffocating. Jacob tried to intervene, his voice soft and placating. "Eliza, we never wanted this to go this far. It was a mistake, but it's over now. We didn't mean to—" "Over?" Eliza snapped, her composure finally cracking. She hurled her wineglass into the fireplace, the shattering sound making them both jump. "You think this is over because you decided it is? No, it's over when I say it's over." Jacob and Lila exchanged nervous glances. The woman standing before them wasn't the Eliza they had known. There was something unhinged in her eyes, a dangerous edge that made them both uneasy. "You know," Eliza continued, her voice dangerously soft, "I spent weeks trying to understand how you could do this to me. I replayed every moment in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. And then I realized, it doesn't matter why you did it. What matters is what I'm going to do about it." "What are you talking about?" Jacob asked, his voice wavering. Eliza smiled, a slow, sinister curve of her lips. "You'll see." Before they could react, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Jacob cursed under his breath, fumbling for his phone, while Lila let out a startled gasp. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, thunder rumbling ominously. "Eliza?" Lila called out, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" There was no answer, only the sound of footsteps retreating into the shadows. Panic began to set in as Jacob and Lila realized they were alone in the room, the locked door sealing them in. "Eliza, this isn't funny," Jacob shouted, his voice tinged with fear. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional crack of thunder. And then, out of the darkness, came Eliza's voice, low and menacing. "Did you know," she said, "that this estate has been in my family for centuries? It's full of secrets, hidden passages, locked rooms, places where no one would ever think to look." "Eliza, stop this!" "Eliza, stop this!" Lila pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry. Please, let us go." "But I'm not done," Eliza replied, her tone almost playful. "You've taken so much from me, it's only fair that I take something from you in return." The sound of a latch clicking echoed through the room, followed by the creak of a door opening. A faint glow illuminated Eliza's figure as she stood in the doorway of a hidden passage. In her hand was a lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Come," she beckoned, her smile chilling. "Let's settle this once and for all." Jacob hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door to the parlor was locked, and the windows were reinforced with heavy iron bars. With no other choice, he and Lila followed Eliza into the passage, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The passage was narrow and winding, the air cold and damp. The walls were lined with cobwebs, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. Liza led them deeper and deeper into the bowels of the estate, the lantern's glow their only source of light. "Where are we going?" Jacob demanded, his voice shaking. "You'll see," Eliza replied cryptically. They emerged into a cavernous underground chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with old books, artifacts, and strange, unidentifiable objects. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, its surface scarred and stained. Eliza placed the lantern on the table and turned to face them. "This," she said, spreading her arms, "is where it ends." "What do you mean?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eliza's smile widened. "You'll find out soon enough." Before they could react, she pulled a lever on the wall, and the sound of heavy machinery filled the chamber. The floor beneath Jacob and Lila shifted, and they fell into a hidden pit, landing with a thud on a bed of damp soil. Above them, Eliza peered down, her expression devoid of pity. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice cold and final. "Now you'll know what it feels like to lose everything." The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. Eliza's laughter echoed through the chamber, a haunting sound that would stay with Jacob and Lila long after the light had disappeared. The darkness in the pit was absolute. Jacob and Lila scrambled to their feet, their hands groping at the cold, damp walls. The air was thick and stale, the faint scent of earth and mildew clinging to their lungs. Panic quickly set in as the weight of their predicament became clear. "Jacob," Lila whimpered, clutching his arm. "What do we do? What is she going to do to us?" Jacob shook his head, his own fear threatening to overwhelm him. I don't know," he stammered. "But we need to stay calm. There has to be a way out of here." Above them, the faint sound of Eliza's footsteps echoed, fading as she left the chamber. Her laughter lingered, sending a shiver down their spines. Jacob turned his attention to the walls, running his hands over the rough stone in search of an opening, a crack, anything that might lead to freedom. "She's lost her mind," he muttered, more to himself than to Lila. "We shouldn't have come here." Lila collapsed onto the ground, her body trembling. "She's gonna kill us," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "Jacob, she's gonna kill us." "Stop it," Jacob snapped, his tone harsh. "Crying won't help. We need to think." As they argued, a faint scraping sound emerged from the darkness. Jacob froze, his ears straining to pinpoint the source. The noise grew louder, a rhythmic scratching that seemed to come from all around them. "Do you hear that?" Lila asked, her voice barely audible. Jacob nodded, his heart pounding. "What is it?" The answer came swiftly and horrifyingly. The scratching was followed by a low, guttural growl that sent a wave of terror through them. Then another growl, and another. The pit was alive with movement, shadows shifting in the blackness. "Jacob," Lila whimpered, clutching his arm. "There's something down here with us." He didn't need her to tell him, he could feel it, the presence of something primal, something hungry. Before he could react, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by another, and another. Whatever was in the pit with them wasn't alone. "Run!" Jacob shouted, though there was nowhere to go. They stumbled through the darkness, their hands outstretched as they tried to avoid whatever was closing in on them. The growling grew louder, the creatures drawing nearer. Back in the chamber above, Eliza sat on a wooden stool, sipping from a fresh glass of wine. She stared at the trapdoor with cold detachment, listening to the muffled sounds of their screams. The storm outside raged on, the thunder drowning out the worst of it, but she didn't need to hear every detail to know what was happening. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, ensuring that her plan would go off without a hitch. The pit, long forgotten by the estate's previous owners, had been her greatest discovery. She had no idea how the creatures had ended up there. Perhaps they were the descendants of something feral, trapped underground for generations. Whatever they were her salvation. Eliza finished her wine and stood, smoothing the folds of her dress. She felt no remorse, no pangs of guilt. Jacob and Lila had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. Betrayal, she thought, deserved nothing less. In the pit, chaos reigned. Jacob and Lila fought desperately to keep the creatures at bay, using rocks and their bare hands to fend off the relentless attacks. But the creatures were cunning, their movements swift and coordinated. It was only a matter of time before the first bite landed. Lila screamed as sharp teeth sank into her leg, pulling her to the ground. Jacob lunged forward, trying to pull her free, but the creatures were relentless. Their snarls filled the air, drowning out Lila's cries. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "I'm lying!" Jacob shouted, his own terror giving way to desperation, but it was no use. The creatures were too strong, their hunger too fierce. Lila's screams turned into gurgles, then silence. Jacob stumbled backward, his hands slick with her blood. He stared at her lifeless body, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The creatures turned their glowing eyes on him, their growls reverberating through the pit. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." He turned and ran, his feet slipping on the damp ground. But there was nowhere to go. The pit was a cage, and he was its prey. The creatures closed in, their snarls growing louder as they prepared to strike. Above, Eliza extinguished the lantern and made her way back through the hidden passage. She emerged into the parlor, locking the door behind her. The storm was beginning to subside, the thunder now a distant rumble. She poured herself another glass of wine and sat by the window, watching as the rain lashed against the glass. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. The weight of betrayal had lifted, replaced by a cold, satisfying sense of justice. Jacob and Lila were gone, their treachery buried with them. The estate was silent once more, the secrets of its dark past preserved for another generation. Eliza raised her glass in a silent toast to herself, a smile playing on her lips. Some wounds, she thought, were never meant to heal. The days following the storm were eerily quiet. Eliza carried on as if nothing had happened, her demeanor calm and composed. To the outside world, she was a grieving bride who had called off her wedding due to unforeseen circumstances. The whispers of gossip were unavoidable, but no one dared to pry too deeply. People were content to speculate and leave Eliza alone with her supposed heartbreak. Jacob and Lila's sudden disappearance raised questions, but Eliza was prepared. She told anyone who asked that the two had run away together, unable to face the scandal they had caused. It wasn't entirely unbelievable. After all, their betrayal was no secret after the disastrous wedding day. The town quickly accepted the narrative, chalking it up to shame and cowardice on Jacob and Lila's part. Weeks turned into months, and the world moved on. The estate returned to its quiet existence, its dark secrets buried beneath its picturesque facade. Eliza immersed herself in her work, maintaining the family estate and engaging in charitable activities to rebuild her reputation. She appeared stronger than ever, her composed exterior giving no hint of the horrors hidden beneath. But the silence of the estate held an unshakable weight. At night, when the world was still, Eliza would sometimes hear faint echoes, the imagined sounds of screams and growls reverberating through the walls. She told herself it was her mind playing tricks, a consequence of her actions weighing on her conscience, yet she never ventured into the hidden chamber again, nor did she disturb the pit where Jacob and Lila had met their end. It was as if that part of the estate had ceased to exist. One evening, months after the incident, Eliza stood by the parlor window, gazing out at the garden. The moonlight bathed the grounds in a ghostly glow, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw two figures standing near the edge of the woods, a man and a woman, their outlines eerily familiar. She blinked, and they were gone. The visions began to come more frequently after that. Shadows flickered in her periphery, whispers brushed against her ears when no one was around, and the cold, damp scent of the pit seemed to linger in the air, no matter how often she aired out the estate. Eliza dismissed them as remnants of her guilt, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of something more sinister. But deep down, she knew. Some acts of vengeance left marks too deep to be erased. The estate might keep her secrets, but the ghosts of Jacob and Lila would never truly leave. They would linger in the shadows, haunting the halls of the grand house, waiting for the day when Eliza would have to face them. And so Eliza lived on, alone in her sprawling estate, a queen of a kingdom built on betrayal and blood. She had won, but her victory came at a cost she could never escape. Some nights, when the wind howled and the storm clouds gathered, she swore she could hear their voices calling her name, their accusations echoing through the darkness. Eliza would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, and whispered to herself the words that had become her mantra. They deserved it. Over and over she repeated it, as if saying it enough times could make it true. But no matter how many times she whispered, the shadows never went away. And so the estate remained, beautiful and serene on the surface, but forever haunted by the sins buried deep within its walls. Eliza's life went on, but she would never again know peace. The past, as she would come to learn, had a way of catching up to even the most careful of planners. And in the still of the night, when the world was quiet and she was alone, she couldn't escape the truth. The ghosts of her betrayal weren't theirs, they were her own.